One. Enron, ExxonMobil, Lance Armstrong, Volkswagen. What do all these brands have in common? They've all experienced a crisis, and it's critical that every brand has a strategy to handle crisis when it strikes their brand. As the Director of Communications for the Florida Transgender Alliance, it's my job to act as spokesperson and effectively deliver my message. And that is never as critical as when crisis strikes. So what we're going to do today is take a look at some brands that have gone through crisis, see how they've responded, and see what we can learn. So what is a crisis? Any situation can spiral into a crisis if it's not handled well. And there can be small crises and big crises. So if you're Jennifer Lawrence and you trip on your way to get your Academy Award, small crisis. Probably talk about it in the post-press conference, but it's okay. But if you're Samsung and your new cell phone keeps exploding, all hands on deck. And this is where your spokesperson comes in. Your spokesperson is the main voice, the single voice for your brand, and they have to have media training. They have to be comfortable in front of a camera. They have to be able to express empathy. They also have to have authority so that they can convey how seriously the company is taking the problem. And it's also important that your message goes wherever your audience is. So it can't just be television and it can't just be print media anymore. It has to be social, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. If you have an audience, your message has to be there. So we talked about small crises and big crises. Let's take a look at a small crisis that stayed a small crisis because of a good response based on the brand. So the Red Cross is one of the most respected charities in the United States. Here's an example of a tweet where their social media manager accidentally tweeted a personal tweet on the official channel. Hey Ryan found 2 more 4-bottle packs of Dogfish Head Midas Touch beer. When we drink, we do it right. Hashtag getting slizzard. So the brand checked in pretty quickly and they responded in a lighthearted way. So less than an hour later, they respond with, "We've deleted the rogue tweet, but rest assured, the Red Cross is sober and we've confiscated the keys." So this response does a couple of things really well. So humor's one, but also they reacted really quickly. They identified that there was a problem, developed a response, and deployed it in less than an hour. They also fixed the problem. The problem was just a rogue tweet, so it's as easy as deleting it, but they did not make the mistake of deleting it and not talking about it. Screen caps are forever, and the internet has a long history, or it has a long memory. So they replied with an update telling their followers what happened. And this is an example of what's called a proportional plus response. And this is a small crisis, but you're gonna see this as a repeated theme as the crises grow larger. So here we're gonna take a look at a FedEx customer's security footage as a package is delivered. So this video spread like wildfire, and in the first 24 hours, over 200,000 people viewed this video. And by the next day, that monitor had been chucked over that fence almost 2.5 million times. So what did FedEx do? They responded quickly on Twitter. So within the first 24 hours, they addressed that they had spoken to the customer and made it right. They also expressed their shared outrage and frustration with the level of service that had been, that their employee had given. So this type of empathy is critical in crisis communication. Now, they wisely chose to mirror the platform where the original crisis occurred. So within 48 hours, they responded on YouTube, and they had a vice president come on and apologize and vigorously denounce the behavior of the employee. So FedEx hit a couple of key strategies of crisis communication. They used a high-profile vice president, so they explained to their customers that they were taking the problem seriously. They also apologized and made it right to the customer. And then they used an outsized response to say that we're going to take this incident, use it as a training opportunity, and this is never going to happen to anybody else. Now, while that problem only impacted one person, it had a large audience. Chipotle had a much bigger problem in the end of 2015, where they had an E. coli outbreak that affected over 20 restaurants and 50 people got sick. So they wisely recognized that that type of crisis demanded a strong response. And so they chose to put their CEO out front, put him on live television, and he apologized. And when apologizing, it is critical to be sincere. You have to actually care about the people that were impacted, and you have to mean it when you say you're sorry. When we heard earlier today about outrageous trust, and a crisis is really just a breach of trust between a brand and its customers. So in the example of Enron and other companies that couldn't come back from a crisis, it's because their behavior was unethical or intentional, and the apologies were not believable, and the public did not accept them. But Chipotle did a great job. They also focused on accountability and addressing the fears of their customers, and their social media team made it their job to respond to nearly every person that mentioned them on social media, telling them where the incident occurred, that it was isolated, and that it was still safe to eat at their restaurants. They also, again, with the outsized response, they knew that just bringing their restaurants back up to code would not repair the eroded trust that had occurred. So they knew they needed to take it to the next level, and they implemented a food safety program that would go beyond all regulatory requirements and become the new gold standard. So they would live up to their slogan of food with integrity. Now, last summer, Southwest Airlines suffered a critical failure in one of their IT network components, and it affected 250,000 passengers. Over 2,000 flights were canceled, and for 12 hours they had zero access to any of their customer-facing services like booking or check-in or rescheduling flights. So for those 12 hours, they had to decide how to interact with their customers. So they wisely decided to use a vice president to have that conversation. And instead of just doing a press release, because they hadn't resolved the problem yet, it was still going on, they decided to make it a two-way conversation. They leveraged Facebook Live video and were able to answer questions in real time as the vice president was live and customers asked questions. Now, this was really effective, but the volume of people affected, 250,000 people stuck in airports, their social media team was quickly overwhelmed, and this really hurt them. This problem was compounded because they chose not to engage on crisis management on Instagram at all. They had an audience, but they viewed that platform as something for, wanderlust and positive posts. And so people turned to this channel for answers and were met with silence. And so this channel was bombarded by angry comments and frustration by those stranded passengers. So it is critical that if you have an audience on a platform, that message gets to that platform. So what happens if a crisis doesn't focus on your brand? What happens when tragedy strikes? How do you as a brand respond? Here's an example of a brand doing it poorly. Food brand Epicurious starts with, "Our thoughts are with everyone in Boston." This is in the aftermath of the Boston Marathon bombing. Now, these tweets are innocuous, right? But strategically, they get lost in a sea of other tweets, so they're ineffective. But worse than that, they're part of a larger problem called slacktivism. You see it on Facebook with flag filters, and what it represents is people choose to engage this way on social media in lieu of offering any real support to victims. So when brands do this, instead of creating a groundswell of support for victims with funds, services, money, things like that, they absolve their responsibility by saying thoughts and prayers. So Epicurious went on to dig the hole deeper, and they chose to try to capitalize on the trending topic. So back to back, they tweeted, "Boston, our hearts are with you. Here's a bowl of breakfast energy we could all use to start today." Ouch. And 30 minutes later, in honor of Boston and New England, may we suggest whole grain cranberry scones? As you can tell, this was received extremely poorly. It was in bad taste and tone deaf. And so ultimately, their social media team did recognize their gaffe, and they went to apologize. But we talked about sincerity, right? So Epicurious decided to apologize by taking a canned message, copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste. And so their followers found that was hollow, and they did not accept the apology. They felt like it was insincere. So Epicurious would have been much better served to say nothing after that. But what happens when you feel like you should respond? When should you respond after a tragedy if you're a brand? So the simple answer to that is if you can use your social capital for good. Let's take a look at how JetBlue responded after the Pulse nightclub massacre here in Orlando last year. So they had the ability to offer a substantial donation, and they were able to help direct their followers who also wanted to donate. So if you can donate or fundraise, that's when you should engage. Orlando is one of the hub cities for JetBlue. It's also where JetBlue University is housed. So they're a member of the Orlando community, just like Disney and Universal. So it made perfect sense for them to draft a press release talking about what they were going to do to help their community in need. So if you're part of the community, that's when you should engage. JetBlue also identified that they could help directly with the people that needed assistance right now. So they stepped up big and they offered a free flight to any family member or domestic partner of somebody that was a victim of the Pulse tragedy. And the feedback from the community was overwhelmingly positive. These are 3, but there are just pages of tweets saying thank you to JetBlue, and they remain one of the best examples of how to respond during a tragedy. President Kennedy once said that the Chinese use 2 brushstrokes when drawing the word crisis. One is for the danger, and one is for the opportunity. So every crisis is an opportunity to build and reinforce the trust between your brand, and your customers. So here's what you can do today to be better prepared when crisis strikes. Institute a crisis team. Who's going to respond when things go wrong? Designate a spokesperson and get them trained. These are the people that put you back on track, not dig a hole deeper. Adopt or develop a monitoring system that keeps track of brand mentions and lets you know if a trend develops. Your team needs to know as quickly as possible so that they can assess the situation and make a plan. It is absolutely critical to pause any scheduled content. We all remember the tweet that made it look like Joan Rivers was hawking iPhones from beyond the grave, right? So it's important for every tweet during crisis management to be on message. If Chipotle was tweeting their lighthearted, jokey posts right after their E. coli crisis, it would have undermined their sincerity, the sincerity of their reassurance that it's safe to eat here. And finally, do a post-crisis analysis. Did you find out early enough? What went well? What can you do better next time? So there will be a next time. In crisis management, it's not a matter of if, but when. So try to plan for the danger, but make sure to also look for the opportunity. Thank you.